So we are ready to start. Our fifth panel, Digital Infrastructures of Women's Solidarity, and I am glad to introduce the next speaker, NATALLIA SARAKAVIK, who will talk about the subjectivity, power, and women's political activism in the digital society. Natalia is a PhD student in European Humanitarian University, and her focus, is understandable from her title of her speech, is the women's protests and how women take part in protests around different countries, and about the women's subjectivity in a political point of view. Natalia, do you hear us?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, very well. So
cool, thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be the part of the event, and thank you for introducing. So I will try to share my screen now and hope that will work. So can you hear can you see my screen?
Yes.
Cool, thank you so much. Okay, then if you don't mind, I will maybe turn off the camera for the period of speech, but then when we will have the opportunity to discuss and hopefully to answer your questions. So I'll be again here with you, but online, but still. So I'm will try to be on timing. So okay. So I'm ready to start, and as already mentioned, my name is NATALLIA SARAKAVIK, and I'm a feminist researcher and an activist, and the study of power and the concept of subjectivity are in the field of my academic interests. And as a part of my PhD, I am exploring the concept of power and subject as developed by Foucault and the revelation of his ideas by Judith Butler. And I've been interested in power formations and interactions for a while, but now my focus shifted more on political issues. And the events in Belarus in 2020 played a significant role in this shift. Like observing what was happening from the side and also actively participating in the events, I couldn't help but wonder what is actually happening with us and how to analyze it using theoretical frameworks. Particular interest to me here is the role of women and how the role of women that they played during the revolution and the role that it is here with us during the Belarusian revolution that is happening. So I'm offering today to you my thoughts of how female political subjectivity is formed under authoritarian power. But for sure, it's a very broad question, and it deserves a big PhD study, which I'm hopefully will be able to suggest to you a bit later in a couple of years, I guess. But still, for now, I will provide the framework to our today's discussion, and we will more focus on the role of digital tools in the process of shaping female political subjectivity. So to gain more comprehensive understanding, I've looked not only on the examples on what was happening during the Belarusian protest, but also some examples from political activism in Iran. So in next 15 or 20 minutes, I will try to establish the theoretical framework regarding questions of power and subjectivity proposed by Foucault and Butler. And additionally, we will have a brief look on examples from practical events illustrated how these concepts are operating. So due to the nature of female socialization, women adopted basic insecurity, a natural belief that we as women are unable to change anything. Therefore, women's political activism is unique as it starts right from the decision of a woman to be politically active. On the example of Belarus, we can see that the ideas of patriarchal society are the basis on which modern authoritarianism rests. The authoritarian state justifies itself by traditional values. A woman in authoritarian state is never considered as a political active subject. Turning to patriarchal ideas, authoritarianism brings up invisibility in women. However, overcoming patriarchy is a step towards achieving political freedom for an entire civil society. The goal is difficult, but modern times provide people with new tools, and digital media is one of such tools. However, for women, digital media also appears as a space where we can feel more united and supported. What is power and political action in response to it? Foucault asserts power is tangible. It can be measured, seen, compared through paying attention to the subject, which is the product created by power, its result. The power reigns not only with the policy. It is naive to assume that we meet our subjectivity exclusively within the political area, bureaucracy, or social institutions. Police, unlike the government, has boundaries for a person elected independently. It is impossible to outline the boundaries of power. They begin within a relationship with another. One way or another, this puts us in front of the question of the inviolability of the flow of being in the form of a subject. As Foucault testifies, revolt, protest, resistance also automatically turns out to be products of power. The wall between a person and the source of power seems to be an emptiness. But what is this emptiness? And thanks to Judith Butler's research efforts, the emptiness has already taken shape. In the 20th century, according to Foucault, the will of submission was considered a kind of biological impulse associated with the fear of death. Butler, in the 21st century, reflects it is not the submission, but a sense of attachment, without which a person is not able to enter into a trusting relationship with the outside world. If a person doesn't obey, but becomes attached, that means that rebellion against the object of attachment is possible, but involves the process of undefined identity, which later leads to interdependency. Foucault includes a feeling of passion in the question of attachment. He argues about the dependence of the subject of the rest, of a sense of subordination and belonging to the object of power. Butler says that attachment is, in any case, stands ahead of the forming of the subject, which calls to enter into power relation. But power affects how attachment will manifest itself, how it will be experienced by the subject already before the object of power. This manifestation of the sensitive experience of attachment is the product of power, previously appearing only as a pure intention necessary for the preservation of life. Turning again to the nature of infant attachment, Butler notices one of the very important features. The upbringing of a particular type of attachment in a person occurs with several branches, which are influenced not only by parents, but also by the policy. That is, the power extend on those who have power over the child. By itself, attachment is a vital necessity of an infant, but the forms of its manifestation are already brought up by power relationship arising from a stronger power. The impassibility and unwillingness to give up power is the psychic feature of power that Butler introduces. This also leads to the observation that the subject feels weak not only by the power, but also by losing the power extended on him or her. Though such a remark, Butler reveals the phenomenon of the subject and power relation, at the root reflecting not so much the negative impact of power on a person as the need of a human awareness of his or her dependence on the formative power. The inevitability that one can create something independently, being aware of the situation. A person becomes a subject not because there is power, but because it is not a human power to be without a sense of power attitude over oneself. Butler also argues that a subject who doesn't make this conversation into himself or herself doesn't occur psychic form of power and doesn't fully exist, since every action of the subject after entering into a power relationship becomes a process of his or her creation. But what is a woman's rebellion against the power relations in which she is included? For the most part of her life, of our life, a woman is preserved by society as an object over which power is exercised, and not a subject bearing the consequences of this power on herself. The protest of a woman against the authorities is a psychological and emotional labor, since a woman remains alone in front of a society that doesn't believe in her and has never believed. The changes brought by a woman through the discovery of her power in spite of objectification subsequently changed the way the power over entire civil society acts. And the example of the women's protest in Belarus in 2020, it was women's non-violent protest that helped to influence and underline the level of brutality of the Belarusian authorities over the protests. And digital media tools helped Belarusian women in this mobilization, which had to be carried out urgently. Thanks to digital media, Belarusian women organized a protest against the violence of the military and police forces in one evening. So here we can turn a bit more our attention to some examples from the experience, and I will start more about the experience from Iran activists, and also that we will turn more into the case of Belarus. There are two opposing models of how the internet has changed protest movements. And the first is that internet has made protests mightier than ever. But the second is that it has made them more ineffectual. These two important aspects of both models are analyzed by Zanab Tuhekti in her book, Twitter and Tear Gas. The power of the internet as a tool for protest is obvious. It gives people newfound abilities to quickly organize and scale. But according to Zanab, it's a mistake to judge modern protests using the same criteria we used to judge pre-internet protests. Zanab says that the internet similarity allows network movements to grow dramatically and rapidly, but without prior building of formal or informal organizational and other collective capacities that could prepare them for the inevitable challenges that will face and give them the ability to respond to what comes next. That makes them less able to respond to government counters, change their tactics, a phenomenon that Zanab called tactical freeze, make movement-wide decisions and survive over the long haul. Zanab isn't arguing that modern protests are necessarily less effective, but they are just different. It's very valuable here to recall the recent events in Iran. In conditions of critical insecurity and political control, Iranian women were able to unite on unthinkable threats. The signification of events in the world media helped Iranian women to feel global support and also to feel security. However, the women's activist movement in Iran began long before 2022. And the effectiveness of this movement was also influenced by digital media. For example, in 2014, there was a digital project, Selfie Freedom, created by Iranian journalist Masih Alandre. Masih disseminated information about violence committed against women in her native country, and also helped to express to Iranians their right to freedom. there was a constant campaign on the website. Photos of Iranian women where their heads uncovered were published at this website, and this allowed women in the country to see the limits of their own freedom. It's also worth remembering that Girls of Antelope movement that emerged in Iran in 2017. The events began with an indefinite action organized by activist Alimiat. Under the terms of the campaign, women in Iran wore white handscarves on Wednesdays. Pictures has gone viral on the internet showing one of the participants of the protest action on Elab Street climbing onto a transformer booth and wearing a white handkerchief. You may see this on the photo. And since that photo got viral, this event, they turned into a whole movement that was called Girls of Inalab. And using the example of Iranian women's activism, we can notice the dynamics. The source of the women's activist movement in condition of strict political control is the information stored inside the digital reality. With the help of the media and the digital community, women find information confirming their own thoughts and experiences that are unacceptable in a particular political system. Information helps to feel confidence and unite. Then a small group of women implements their activist activities. The media and the digital world cover this event, which helps other women gain self-confidence and join those who share common values with you. This influences the creation of a women's activist movement, which subsequently led to changes in the general political system. The essence of authoritarian and violent regimes is to cut off any opportunity to think about our own rights. But digital reality remains independent of political instruments of pressure. If social reality convinces you of the justice of power, the digital world shows to you thoughts about your freedom are correct. A striking example in the women's Belarusian protests of 2020, online platforms provide Belarusian women with more security in the implementation of political activism. Women's political activism in Belarus, first of all, also requires defending women's rights regardless of time. The protests of 2020 influenced the fact that Belarusian women discovered the power of change the political field in a way that society never expected from them. An example in the case of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, among all the alternative candidates, she was allowed to participate as a woman. That is the view of the patriarchal regime, that that woman is not considered to be serious competitor. It's also important paying special attention to the public discourse that excited during the Belarusian protest. So now you can see the couple of slides where the famous, worldwide famous media and how they call the Belarusian revolution, and paying a special attention on women's role during the Belarusian events during 2020. However, what do we see after the wave of Belarusian protests? Women remain politically active, but civil society pretends they do not exist. This provision shows that women's political activity is not only a response to the action of the authorities, but also a struggle for the right to be themselves. The media project Girls Power Belarus took a very important role in organizing and highlighting the Belarusian women protests in 2020. However, after the protests, the activity of the media project didn't stop, but also increased its scale. According to the statistics that we can see now on the slides, Girls Power Belarus, the major Belarusian media in terms of gender equality representation of public opinion are not even close to 30%. We see statistics, but what reality does it indicate? Statistics indicate the Belarusian digital reality in which a woman is deprived of the right to realize her potential. Thus, on the example of Belarus, we can notice the dynamics in which Belarusian women are ready for political activity before approaching the tension point. This readiness for leadership and activism manifested itself at the time of the onset of a critical situation. However, the feeling of this critical situation was influenced by digital reality, which covered the events hidden by the official authorities. Further, the tools of digital reality help women to mobilize and carry out large-scale activities. A woman in Belarus has come to the fore. At the end of the wave of protests, civil society once again turned to the patriarchal idea of male power. And now, right now, Belarusian women continue to be politically active, have their own expertise, but due to the spatial structure of the society, it is still needed to pretend that there is a strong man somewhere behind the woman, telling her how to be politically active. It's not a one case of Belarus. As Sana Tuhati, we have already mentioned today, noticed in her book, digital reality tools help in more effective implementation of activism, but don't appear to be as effective in achieving goals. Political actions carried out with the help of social networks and other media platforms brings a quick impact, but it also ends quickly. When there is a protest organized with the help of digital tools, at first it seems that the goal of the protest is getting closer than ever. However, then comes the reality remote from the digital world, a reality in which the most effective protest is suppressed by the authorities using traditional instruments of political pressure, violence, and brutality. Thus, despite the enormous benefits brought by the digital world to activism, it is necessary to remember that people are struggling with a real social reality, not only in digital space. And to conclude, I'd like to say that unfortunately, even liberal and democratic ideas in society that live under dictatorship very often turn out to be completely intolerant towards women. In order to carry out political activism, women need a space where they feel safe and discover confidence in their abilities despite the consequences of female socialization. The social reality of patriarchal society cannot be such a place. Therefore, online platforms has an important impact on the formation of women's political leadership and activism. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'm back here with you, and I'll be glad to maybe answer your questions or give any comments.
Natalia, thank you so much for a brilliant presentation. Maybe someone has a question, yeah?
Thank you for your speech. It's very actual and interesting. And I want to ask you to summarize the specific of women transmit activities from online to offline area. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question and your attention to my presentation. Unfortunately, I can't see you, but yeah, I'm glad that we are somehow still here in contact now. But yeah, this really very interesting question on how this transmit happens, and I guess that the topic we are discussing today and most of the topics we are discussing today, it really deserves a very precise and very deep investigation, I would say. So that's why I guess that this transmission, the part of how it transmits from online to offline, it also could be a topic for a specific study or research. Yeah, maybe it could be like a qualitative research also. So my focus was more onto how to highlight how the digital instrument helps women to unite and to act during some of this political activism. But I would say that the specific of this transmission, it's about a bit in another focus of maybe another discussion. So, but I would say that the main thing that we have to highlight here, that the digital instruments definitely is very helpful in this political activism for women, and for sure it I would say that it helps this as, for example, as an example of the Iranian case, we can see that seeing digitally other women doing something, some offline political acts, other women, it's encouraged them to do it not only in digital sphere, but also to go offline. So I would say that this transmission, maybe it happens like more in a high level. I would say that from this online to offline. So we can't say that it stays on the online, the political activism, or it raise up the offline political activism significantly, because yeah, for sure that the sphere we're talking about the dictatorship and the brutal instruments that the power works with. Offline, we can't like take it out of our attention. So yeah, so I would say I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I hope that maybe somehow I give the comment on it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you for your presentation, and we can move forward. Maybe someone else has questions. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yes, we are ready, finally. So, to tell the truth, it's a little bit strange to present myself. So, my name is ANTONINA STEBUR, and today I would like also somehow to continue this section that's connected to the political dimension of gender inequality in material labor. And probably I should make a small comments for this presentation. And yesterday, some of us visited the exhibition, If Disrupted, It Becomes Tangible, and somehow this presentation also founded on this more than 1 year research during the preparation of this exhibition that I curated with my colleague Alexey Beresyonok. The exhibition is still in National Art Gallery in Vilnius. And unfortunately, when we prepared the exhibition, we particularly didn't discuss so much gender issue. But for me personally, it was crucial, and through this theoretical and conceptual framework that we created during the preparation of this exhibition and during the exhibition itself, because it usually takes a lot of time. of communication with different experts, artists, and communication together. I think that this framework that we created is very productive for thinking about how gender inequality happens through the on an infrastructural point of view when we talk about the IT, informational technologies. And first of all, sorry, I a little bit started to jump in through the slides. Sorry for that. I would like to start with the brilliant artwork of Polish artist Alicja Rogalska. The name of this artwork is dark fiber. And this dark fiber is a special term that in optics waves, when the internet builds during these constructions, they created special potential ways for developing of these wires. And this potential, not actual, but potential wires usually calls dark fiber. And this is a very brilliant and very beautiful artwork that connected, and on the visual point of view, we see how these optic fibers created. But the background told us the story that truly happened in real life. It was the story of very poor Georgian woman who lived in a very small, poor village. She, in 2011, she cut the internet cable and cut the internet between Georgia and Armenia. And it was really interesting because there are many media wrote about this story, not in Georgia and Armenia, but as well as international media like Guardian and New York Times, for example. And it was very interesting because they described this woman a little bit in an ironic point of view, that, oh my God, she is so illiterate woman who cut the internet, who couldn't recognize just ordinary wire with cuprum, that because to collect the metal was her attempt to find added money. And she even didn't know particular what internet really was. And in this ironic style of the many media, how they try to describe this story, laid the interesting barrier of the real situation, because in these artworks, Alicja Rogalska used brilliant poetry, and she said hunger for data is more important than hunger for food. And what it really mean, that no of these media didn't describe the real situation of these women and why she cut this internet. That these women had experience of collapse of the Soviet Union, several wars, several waves of privatization, reducing of retirement payment, or decreasing the social protection system. And she forced to do something to find any money. And she started to collect metal and to buy it. And this is how our internet, our informational technology, very deep into our political and economical point of view, and how they created the barrier, not only because we have different access to the internet at all, but because we have, through this story, we have a particular power relationship and the responsibility for her poorness and for her bad financial condition laid in this story, according to the media narrative, only on the side of these personal woman, not only the state or the society or any other very difficult context that she should found herself, and that she should find new ways how to earn money to survive. And this is how the inequality, and this is to and this is lead to the idea that our regions, and when we talk about our exhibition that we created with Alexei, we use a lot of the term resourcification that we took from the Ukrainian researcher Ася Bazdaryeva with her brilliant essay, No Love, No Milk. Then she described how the Ukraine, the image of Ukraine created through not only through the Russian power relationship, but also between Western countries as well. And to understand our territory is a resource, and to take responsibility to their particular people, ignoring their social, economical and political context, is also especially influence on agenda issue. And moreover, when we started to think, and we talked somehow during our conference also, that our international technology are not neutral. They are not neutral. They are like any other infrastructure. They are not neutral. And in her essay, Natalia Selevich mentioned that in the late of 1980s, due to the crisis of the military industry, a community of skills engineers entered to the market, whose labor was cheaper than their Western colleagues. On the other hand, new actors who came after the collapse of the Soviet Union used existing infrastructure of their and their ruins, such as universities, research institutions, military industrial complex, and so on. Of course, when we talk, and we also have in our exhibition the term IT colonialism, then when we talk about the resourcification, when we talk about the IT sector, it's not like a fossil fuel. They are not using fossil fuel, but they use the so-called the human resources. And it's very interesting that in English, human resources is still resources. So it's also how we can describe this unequal relationship in IT sphere. And so, as I mentioned, that we can see the map of the city, the city of the most development IT infrastructure. It's almost the same city that was that had a good quality technical institution, research institutes, or research center, and I don't know, cybernetic centers, and so on. For example, Dnipro, Kharkiv, Minsk, and so on. And yeah, so we can. Oh, sorry. So, and I think that, well, and to return to the idea how to try to think about how this situation influenced by women, with my colleagues, we also have the term disruption. That disruption, that usually we don't think about infrastructure, and we don't feel how this infrastructure works when it works properly, and especially we don't understand that that any infrastructure influence politically. They usually we don't usually think about how, for example, internet is organized until the fact when this internet, with someone cut this internet, and after that we feel that this internet is not something immaterial, but has very material level. And sometimes the idea of disruption or breakdown helps us to understand better the barriers, stereotypes, and inequality points, and how this inequality is constructed, because we started to understand that this infrastructure is not only something natural, but not also something not something natural, but not something natural. And it's also how they social organized and how they maintain the power relationship. And especially, and I would like now to return to the ground and to think about that. Probably majority of us know that after the 2020 and after the increase in the high level of repression, a lot of IT companies started to process the relocation, and now in Belarus, the majority of IT companies, the biggest IT companies in Belarus now, they are not situated in Belarus, and now they are trying to identify themselves as a Belarusian. As a great example, for example, EPAM, who was founded in Belarus and who has the biggest employers office in Belarus, but now it builds their brands at the, first of all, US company, not Belarusian company, without any mentions about Belarus. But what's really important, when I talk about relocation is a relocation of particular person, particular people, and we have a number of structured how the IT sphere in Belarus was structured according to different gaps. And for example, Yana also mentioned some numbers, but I just repeat some of them and added something new. And we have in Belarusian IT, we have only 26.2% of women, and probably it's not enough, of course, but in comparison with worldwide, it's almost the same situation over other countries in US, for example. But it doesn't mean that it's something good, because we should understand that during the relocation, the majority of people who were relocated with their families, and it means that the majority people who were relocated were men, and women should relocated with them, and the majority of these women, they don't have any IT experience, IT specialization, and they are and now after the relocation they found themselves in totally social isolation. It wasn't the detailed planning relocation. They don't have any plan. And I remember the brilliant article of Elena Gapova, hopefully she presents here, about the wives of Russian programmers. And somehow it's also to repeat the situation of total isolation into different countries, and they find themselves in a totally precarious position. We should understand that what this 26.2% of women is. We should understand that the majority of these 26.2% of women means that it's not the majority of them works with the product. They are not the developer, the IT developer. They are not the product designer or something who feel themselves stable, who can, even after the relocation, change their work easily, because it doesn't matter in what national company you sign your code on Python. You can find switch and jump from one job to another job beyond any borders. But the majority of women in IT, they work in a service caring job. It means that the majority of them is HR, and thanks, Jana, that you describe this situation with HR. It's even better to understand their precarious position that they carry all the time. And it's not only that they are precarious and to work, to do this 24 hours caring job, but it means that for them relocation means isolation, because they work with the Belarusian context. It's very difficult for I don't know, for marketing specialists, for HR specialists to switch faster from one company to another company. They have very codependence, to tell the truth, relationship with their companies. They find themselves in a very dependent situation. And now we feel it after the during these several waves of relocation, and we can see to prove my idea that the Belarusian website, the main IT platform, dev.by.dev.com.it.io, they found that the majority of relocated people where women and where men and women were even less than an average in the market, only 22.4%. And we can see that the majority of people relocated with their families or with their partners. You can see the last numbers, that only 17.6% of any IT relocating employees move just alone. The majority of them move with the partners, with their families, with children, and so on, so on, so on. So it's also how this dependence relationship and how this inequality formed. And we can see it now, especially because the IT in Belarus almost in ruin. We don't have any companies, almost any companies inside the Belarus, and the majority of Belarusian IT company outside. And in particular, I would like to finish my speech, I would like to the particular story, because when we see the number, we see the number. We don't think about this number as real people. But what does it mean, this number? This number means real people. And unfortunately, we have awful story several months ago on the 2nd March 2023, one of the employees of more or less middle-sized company, IT company, HQ Software, died, and the reason of this of her death was the total bullying from the company. And so it's also how she cannot leave the company. She couldn't. She would like, but the company didn't allow to do it. And the emotional when you saw this, when you see this, inside the company change the messages, you understand the toxic relationship inside the company. And after this situation, many women started to talk about discrimination in IT, because very often we think that when you do something innovative, this innovative not connected on the product, but only the social relationship inside the company as well. But it doesn't mean. And one of the for the end of the story, I would like to just quote one of the employees. Unfortunately, she gave these comments anonymous, but it doesn't mean it's really important. She said, in general, the IT sphere is much more backwards compared to others. There are many sexist, racist, and anti-Semitic jokes. An employee can give out a very rude, inappropriate joke or phrase on a call and not understand that he did something wrong. He did something wrong. All the talk about work-life balance and respect for mental health remains just a line in a vacancy to attract those who care about it. So I would like to stop with this. Thank you so much. Maybe do you have a question? Yes, probably.
Are you scared of my questions? No. Okay. Look, you began with this. I'm trying to tie together, two parts of your story. And you began with this story of this Georgian woman who cut the internet, which of course reminds me of Anton Chekhov's story, which is called, what is the title of that story? Muzhiki or something, where these illiterate peasants they disrupt the railway line and the train derails, and they do this because they do not understand. They just need this this metal. So. It seems to me that most people who disrupt infrastructure are male just because men do more crime than women do. And, of course, definitely infrastructures are really big systems, and big systems are usually built by the state. So, or very big corporations. So we need really these very, very big structures to have this internet, to have all these power systems, power grids, etc. And of course, the latest story, probably for us in Belarus, is the story of this Tutbay media, which was closed, and its servers were destroyed by the government, by the Belarusian state. So we now do not have this 20 years of information that was stored there. So of course, infrastructure is crucial, but I do not see the connection between this first part of your story, and then you proceeded to the discussion of the division of labor in information companies, IT companies. So I just do not see the connection between the two.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this question, because I should clarify these connections. I started with the description of the situation with cutting internet to illustrate not only the barrier of internet, but first of all that we have, if we can to talk about it, to describe in this category, like several lines of colonization. I remember the brilliant book by Agata Pyzik, Poor But Sexy, when she described the situation with privatization in Poland, when this privatization process was awful. And it was a very interesting situation in Eastern Europe that we can hear in this point of view. On the one hand, very crucial capitalistic ideological like a process to, but at the same time, she described the situation when goes something wrong. They said that it's not a capitalistic problem. It's a problem of people who don't understand, who didn't do their work in a good way. And I think that the problem of the connection of these two parts is that the majority, why the so high level of discrimination, but silence discriminate, but this discrimination, they keep in silence usually. It's a very, it's a several cases when women, very privileged women, started to talk about their discrimination. And Marina Mentosova, who presented the first part of the speech, of her first part of the research, had the second part when she gave the several interviews with women who very well who made a brilliant careers in IT, and several of them, they didn't have the question about discrimination and especially about harassment. Not discrimination, about harassment, but they started to talk about the harassment and about even rapist cases. It's how this, and because we think that it's something not proper with us, but not with the system. That's why I started with this woman who was blamed, not because nobody can understand her context, that she, this is awful that women who made a brilliant, who had a job, and after this job she had to do any retirement salary payment, but because of the fall of the Soviet Union, so many dramatic systems, several wars, several privatization line, she hadn't any money for survival. She shouldn't collect. Yeah. And that's why everybody describe that something wrong with this woman, and many of women in even IT, they feel the same, something wrong with them, not with this, not with the system, because system is perfect. We should respect these neoliberal values, and we should agree 100% because we have good opportunity, and so on, so on, so on. This is maybe, yes, I should more explicitly to talk about it, to connect between two.
Thank you. I actually don't have a question. It's more like a comment. First, about the figures of 26%. Just if you remember, when we started to write this proposal for women in tech, we operated by the figures of 2017, and 2017 the figures were 20%. So I don't know whether it's a progress or not, but plus 6% over the course of 6 years. And secondly, I also wanted to make a comment on this case of Katerina Krychok. I've sent you, Tonya, the link to the investigation made by Nasha Niva, and the case actually is much more complex than it was presented from the beginning. In particular, in what concerns the situation with her boss in this company in which she worked for the last day, because he, I don't know whether you know or not, but he did not respond to her letters because he was actually detained by KGB, and he deleted also his accounts in the social media. And as for herself, I think that the case or the problem of relocation for both women and men and families is also a question of medical care. And since she had a very rare disease, only 200 cases in the entire world, and one of them is her. So it means that actually she was unable to get the proper medical care, and the death was the resulted from out of all of these unfortunate circumstances. Although of course I'm not saying that there was no bullying, but I would just probably be hesitating to take it as a particular example of that resulted directly from bullying.
I try to answer to these two comments. The first, I thought to include not these comments, but because of the a little bit increasing from 20 till 26% of women in IT, the dev, this platform dev.by, they describe, finally we have gender equality, because they started to think in Silicon Valley, they also had just approximately 1/3 of women in IT, and it's not an equality, but they describe it as a so proud way. And to return to the case Katya, yes, I didn't mention very important thing, that her case was, as usually it happened, was a starting point to discuss, and many IT specialists, women IT specialists, female IT specialists, they started to talk that, oh, we don't know that this company full of bullying, that they have many bullying cases, but nobody talk about them. They just keep it silence, and maybe they just through the word of mouth you can know something about it. But you, for example, newcomer, as Katya was, you're so happy to find this job. And how many people in our country check the reputation of the company? Almost nobody. And that's why maybe when they started to search in a particular women IT charts and communities, she found this information. But nobody did it. Because it's not like a media, you should be a part of this community. And that's why it's how this, for me personally, it was really strange that everybody knows about this very abusive atmosphere in this company, but everybody kept the silence.
Some more short comments. Actually, this would be a good idea probably for one of our future research fellows to initiate to conduct the research on the relocation and the conditions of work in the relocated companies, because it was one situation in 2021, but now 2 years after, when people already start changing the locations of their work and also countries, and the companies are developing different strategies of adjustment to the local context, it would be really interesting to look from gender perspective, from feminist perspective, to the question of relocated workers. And the second comment was about the master thesis that was defended recently by Anastasia Selivanova, and she was exactly writing about the case of high-skilled women who had to migrate to other countries, and what do they do, and how do they fail actually to overcome this isolation. It's really a big problem.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for your speech, and I would ask you about this research of the women taking part in IT sphere is important because it's a very rare case of women role in the well-paid sphere, or you can see another important trends of this research. It's the first questions, and how you can evaluate the ironic order of significance in the representative women in IT sphere, how it's successful, how's the result of this ironic type of control women? Thanks.
They compare not with the gender equality category, but they compare with Silicon Valley. They say that if in Silicon Valley they have approximately 30% of women, so we almost also have the 30% of women, so we are very well balanced in the gender issue. So it's this media didn't think about the really gender equality, and especially to think about the structured. They have these numbers, all these numbers that I showed, these numbers that was collected by this media, but they never I don't know, analyze through the gender optic. They said, yes, we have almost 100% of women in HR. What does it mean? They didn't comment it. They just say, okay. And so this is, but I forgot the first question. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, to tell the truth, there are so many reasons for that, and one of the most important reasons that in Belarus especially, we have a totally unique case that, notwithstanding the fact that we are very governmental controlling business companies, the IT sphere were until 2020 were the less controlled by government, because they cannot arrest. What they arrest? Arrest the documents, but it's really easier to relocate people. And for many people, young people, it is still also, and it was almost only one chance to I don't know, to have a good salary, to live in a more freedom, in a more free situation, or so on. But of course, the financial point of view was the perfect, what the most important, and probably the second is that to be something interesting, to do something important, interesting, that connected to the whole world, and so on, so on, so on. But at the same time, for me personally, that Belarusian IT, the salary gap in IT is the most salary gap in comparison with other spheres. So on the one hand, we have a lot of opportunities, but on the other hand, we have the widest, the hugest gap in a salary in Belarus, in Belarusian IT. And now when I talk about Belarusian IT, it means that Belarusian IT who in Belarus and who outside the Belarus. But the Belarusian companies or more than half of their staffs are from Belarus. Yeah, we have one more panelist. Oh. So, thank you. If you have any question, we can continue to discuss it during the lunch. So, So I see the Valeria, okay. So we will continue our panel, and the last but not least, of course, our speakers, Valeria Baravets, and she also continued even more about the 2020 and even more connected with the speech of NATALLIA SARAKAVIK, and her speech will be dedicated to mediated trauma and emotional labor, a case of Belarus after 2020. Valeria, do you hear us?
Yes, hello. I do hear
Hello.
you. Do you hear me? And do you see me?
Yeah, we see you well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just have one small question. Should I share my screen or is it there somewhere?
It will be perfect if you share your screen by yourself.
Of course, sure. So give me just a sec.
Of course.
Yeah, and it was very pleasant to hear that you introduced me with the Valeria. I felt a little bit like the Beatle. Yeah, this is my presentation. If you don't see it anyhow, then please let me know. No comments, okay. So good morning, dear friends, colleagues, and members of the academic community. I'm very happy to see you, even though online, unfortunately, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. The topic of my presentation would be mediated trauma and emotional labor, a case of Belarus after 2020. And in its main part, I'll focus on the aspects of gender and emotional labor and their place in development and resistance to the Belarusian trauma. Such a viewpoint of trauma theory seems to me here relevant in the context of Belarusian protests and ongoing political crisis, which remains unresolved to this day and suspended with risks and possibilities of various spectrums. And with a couple of brief examples, I aim to highlight certain problematic areas that, in my opinion, deserve attention in future research. So to start, a few words on the relevance of the topic. I believe that in analyzing the Belarusian trauma and collective identity, sorry, the inclusion of a gender perspective is crucial here. The need for a feminist perspective can be explained by the fact that women played a key role in the protests and their political agency could no longer be considered invisible or insignificant. It also seems appropriate to describe the political structure that holds power through techniques of both physical and symbolic violence from the standpoint of patriarchy theory, as gender aspect and gender-based violence also play a role in maintaining the system. Thus, by rising up against autocracy and overlooking the gender issue, we risk achieving only cosmetic transformations, even in the case of victory. In addition, I also see it relevant to analyze the Belarusian crisis from perspective of cultural trauma theory in terms of discursive work and its construction and unfolding, and collective experience and mediated trauma and emotional labor in overcoming it. Let me outline just few theoretical points to the start. Beyond the focus of transformation started in 2020, I propose to incorporate a feminist perspective in the analysis of power relation system in contemporary Belarus. Overall, the theory of patriarchy proposed by second-wave feminist scholars seems to be the most effective to me here. The introduction of patriarchy concept was motivated by the notion that the term sexism did not capture the very essence of gender oppression. Instead, the theory sees gender inequality relations as fundamental and reproduced at every level, starting from family socialization and interpersonal communication, as well as ideology, cultural prescriptions, and knowledge production. And the tenets of this theory align well with Belarusian society, I think. Nevertheless, such an approach also contains the possibility of criticism. As was noted by Valerie Bryson, this conceptualization does not consider relations of oppression within different groups of women. And in the case of Belarus, from both an analytical and activist perspective, I believe that incorporating an intersectional approach here is critical for addressing the patriarchy, because as can be seen from numerous examples, women may occupy actually higher positions in the hierarchy by serving the political interests of the elites and legitimizing the system, while many men who do not conform somehow to the cultural image of hegemonic masculinity in the system may hold more subordinate position. So consequently, gender here cannot be separated from the issues like nationality, economic status, sexual identity, and so on. Moreover, I think within the boundaries of Belarus, political involvement and views can serve as additional grounds for oppression. Gender in the system exists as a prescription, disobedience to which exposes the subject to some kind of social sanction, and categories of femininity and masculinity norm are actively reproduced, used by political players, and unfortunately, some forms of such prescriptions persist and go unnoticed even in pro-democratic discourses and movement. So in understanding the system of inequality within Belarus is deeply rooted in culture and collective consciousness, it also seems relevant to include a post-structuralist perspective into the analysis, like Foucault's concept of power relations and Butler's concept of heteronormative matrix, which self-reproduces through constant citation of gender prescriptions, surpassing and anticipating the emergence of the subject itself. According to Butler, the citation of regulatory norms sustains the stability of matrix, while non-compliance exposes the subject to some kind of sanctions or psychosis. The boundaries of the entire system here are delineated by so-called constitutive outside that ultimately determine the domains of normativity. And here I'd like to highlight two important points, as it seems to me. First, the constant citation of gender prescriptions, and furthermore, the compliance with prescriptions that establish the position of a woman that more dependent and marginalized are in themselves associated with certain invisible emotional labor. And second, the more subject is aware of these invisible power relations, their place in the matrix and threats for non-compliance, the greater the emotional resources required to fulfill this obligation. And returning to the current state, I suggest examining the ongoing crisis from the perspective of cultural trauma theory and mediated trauma as a more focused way in analyzing the personal experiences. The key point of this concept here is the assumption that it is not the event itself that triggers the trauma as a direct consequence, but rather trauma is constructed discursively and occurs by appropriation of this discursive statement by some collective. And while seeing trauma as natural reaction, one can consider the date of August 9 as this starting point. Then looking at the Belarusian discursive field through the lens of Shtomka's concept of traumatic sequence, for example, the starting point, I think, here could be the COVID crisis, when a collision of two distinct systems of cultural prescriptions occurred there, and followed by political mobilization, crystallization of solidarity ties, and certain shaping of collective we of the society. The second important point of the sequence would be the morning after the internet was turned back on, and when a whole stream of political cruelty was penetrated in the discursive field and further defined the boundary of this confrontation, shaping the image of the antagonist as well as the victim. Of course, this topic of cultural trauma in Belarus should become the subject of a more comprehensive analysis and profound, primarily with the aim of inventing more effective tools for resistance. And as noted by Niels Melzer, trauma always contains both pain and opportunity, and it's being decided now how Belarusian society will be able to seize this opportunity. At present, we are at a point of uncertainty where the discourse of trauma has been formulated and embraced, but the symbolic confrontation continues. And I would like to provide just a few examples regarding the role of women's emotional labor in this confrontation. First, let me share two interesting aspects, which seems to me interesting. The first one is the political mobilization, and particularly women's response to that. Women's marches in Belarus have become a new focal point of resistance, elevating the protest to a new level. Through the performative act of appearing on the streets, women responded to authorities' disregard by asserting themselves as full-fledged political subjects. However, it would be an omission to label the women's protest, as I see it, as inherently feminist. Instead, it appears to me to be an example of challenging the patriarchal system from within. Despite the presence of feminist activists, of course, within the protest, the mass movement was not united around the value of women's emancipation. Motivation for many who took to the streets on August 12 and after was the protection and care for their family, community, and common good. The unifying value here does not go very much beyond the cultural foundations of patriarchy and traditional roles of care and emotional support, often attributed to women. And with those motivations, women engage in confrontation with the repressive patriarchal system, sometimes on its own grounds. Additionally, the response to trauma is interesting in terms of how empathy for victim manifested in women's movement. A good illustration of this can be traced in words of activist Olga Gorbunova, who said that in 2020, women stood up in solidarity, condemned violence, and helped victims because women know what it's like to be beaten, humiliated, and raped. And in this context, the concept of mediated trauma seems to provide a relevant framework for analysis where the subject, by associating with the victim, adapts and feels their pain as their own. And here the discourse of trauma becomes embedded in the subject as a very personal experience. In Kate Millett's notes on political cruelty, describing sexualized violence and discursive violence as a tool of political oppression, the author states that the goal of the authority here is to reduce the political subject to the position of a woman. And as we know, this method of violence is also employed in Belarusian prisons, and the possibility of such violence as a sanction works in practice because the position of a helpless object here, the position of a woman in the system, is undesirable for many. And at the same time, because woman knows this position and this constant risks of humiliation and disempowerment, this knowledge itself allows her to feel the pain of a man who has been reduced to this level as her own corporate pain. The second interesting phenomenon I'd like to share is that trauma experience has served as an opportunity for deciphering previously hidden power relations. And this deciphering, I think, represents the hidden potential contained within trauma, which can be used for more effective resistance strategies or discursive reshaping. And now I would like to focus a bit more on the issue of emotional labor as part of work involved in addressing trauma. the ambulance. In addressing trauma, so the emotional work here, it's important to note that the analysis of emotional labor involved in women's experiences in the context of uncertainty and high risks can encompass multiple vectors and multiple variables that influence its extent and its nature. And that is why the integration of an intersectional approach and attention to individual experience is needed. To briefly outline some examples of such vectors, those can be care for the family during the crisis, emotional labor in coping with trauma, and resistance work. And in the first case, the elements of invisible labor can be, for example, taking care of children and facing difficult dilemmas in upbringing them when a formal education system imposes knowledge and prescriptions that differ from intra-family rules or norms. It also includes taking care of family or community in a situation of constant risk of political persecution or caring for those affected by such persecution. And as for the variables that combined can provide an intersectional perspective, factors such as location within or outside Belarus, economic status, which may determine whether women can access psychological or pharmacological help or not, sexual identity, marital status, experience of political persecution, and many others will be significant here. I'd like to provide just a few examples that I attained through a small series of expert interviews with psychologists from Belarus and in-depth interviews with Belarusian women, each of whom perceived the political trauma of Belarusian society as their own. Of course, this data cannot be considered representative for the entire community. However, it can provide some examples and hopefully indicate the need for further research. So in the interviews with psychologists, all of whom work with Belarusian and trauma-related conditions associated with the political crisis, the presence of a significant gender imbalance was evident right away. First of all, just in the informants, all the informants were women, and although this was a convenience and small sample, the imbalance can be explained by the statistically higher proportion of women in care industries and in this industry, in this profession as well. So each of them also admitted that both overall and after the events of 2020, the absolute majority of their clients were and are women. They explained this gap by the fact that women find it easier to seek help due to cultural norms, and they're just more open. One of them noted that men not only seek help less, but also come with more serious conditions. And even then they tend to hesitate and say that they may not need any help. So this can be primarily explained by the construct of masculinity and the need to conform to that. And this issue could be the subject of further critical investigations of masculinity studies. In general, the psychologists identified depressive and anxiety disorders as the prevailing conditions of most of their clients. And these disorders are fueled by the state of unresolvedness, unresolved trauma, as well as constant fear of political punishment. As for the emotional labor associated with coping with trauma, some informants highlighted reactions or strategies such as mimicry or internal censorship. In the case of mimicry, in the first case, as explained by one of the informants, the inability to cope with fear on early stages of protests as the crisis escalated and as the risks of violence increased led clients to a point where they could not feel safe now, even by not expressing enough loyalty. In this context, the emotional labor that many Belarusian women can face every day is firstly related to addressing their own fears on a daily basis, and secondly, to constantly framing positive emotions or appropriate emotions in order to protect themselves and their families. In the second case, the focus is more on resistance strategies and displaying solidarity with victims. In order to maintain this connection of solidarity, individuals can voluntarily deprive themselves of positive experiences through self-imposed prescriptions or prohibitions, consciously taking on the emotional burden of empathizing with victims' pain and coping with that pain then. Finally, I would like to offer a few more examples of decoding the system of power relations as an effect of such trauma. In in-depth interviews to informants with a 10-year age difference, describing their emotional state after the protests, used the peculiar expression being raped by the state. And one of them admitted that the most horrifying feeling she had to confront and continues to work with, even after leaving Belarus, is the sense of absolute helplessness, deprivation of agency when you have no influence on your own life. The informant linked this feeling both to the shared experience of political struggle and personal experiences of losing her job, facing administrative arrests, losing friends due to immigration, etc. For her, restoring this sense of significance became a kind of goal and a vector for work with yourself. The second informant here used the same expression, describing it as a feeling of the total power of the oppressor on the one hand and powerlessness on the other. As this woman had experience working with victims of sexualized violence, she said that she knew in theory how this works. And after 2020, she said that she deeply felt this sense of humiliation in practice now. In this case, we can discuss not only the appropriation of others' pain, but the internalization of trauma, but also the decoding of patriarchal power mechanisms. The resistance strategy to for this informant became the creation of new prescriptions regarding interpersonal communication. She admitted that now any power imbalance became unacceptable to her, and she builds now all relationships on the basis of total equality. And first of all, this concerns equality in the ability to cope with common trauma. In both the cases, there was a deciphering of power matrix as a trauma effect. However, I want to propose one more example illustrating the need for an intersectional perspective, where this effects occurred much earlier. The main difference between next informant and the others lie in her non-normative sexuality. She admitted that as a homosexual woman, she felt her mismatch, her inability to fit into the structure of norms within society. And as a result, she felt unsafe throughout her whole life. And after coming out, she also faced aggression within her family and society. And in this example, there was captured a whole layer of invisible emotional work, primarily focused on framing gender performance reflecting certain norms, then resistance to these normative prescriptions, and the assistance provided to those who have also found themselves outside the matrix, as this particular woman also involved in care activism. Having the experience of political imprisonment, this informant admitted that in prison, non-normative sexuality was used by guards as the basis for humiliation and threats. And since security was a constantly lacking value for her, the pursuit of this value and ensuring safety around her became primarily vector for both in terms of dealing with her own trauma and in helping others. She also used the discourse of feeling raped by the state as well, describing the overall emotional state of those subjected to political imprisonment with her. And this feeling became something that bound her up more closely to the victims as a shared sense of solidarity. So even after leaving the country, she chose a strategy of consciously refusing positive emotions to maintain the solidarity chain with those who are still suffering. As she said to me, that those who are in Belarus right now, even if they're not in prison, they still not living, and that she doesn't allow herself to live as well with them. So those were just a few examples with which I aimed to emphasize the need for further analysis, of course, regarding gender aspect and emotional management within cultural trauma in Belarusian society. And to conclude, since as I see it, and I hope to be wrong, patriarchal ideology is still somehow influential in Belarus. A significant emotional burden continues to fall on women, both in the form of paid care labor, care-related activism, and unpaid hidden labor amidst a political crisis, constant fear, climate of uncertainty, and helplessness. It would also be a mistake to say that all the emotional burden falls mostly on women overall, as thousands of men in prison being tortured and millions living in fear of becoming next victims also suffer from the same system and its ideological prescriptions that stop them even from seeking help. So overall, I believe that the experience of trauma would allow more persons to recognize the nature of patriarchal power mechanisms and the need to resist it from the very core foundations. And adopting a feminist approach to challenge the system here would benefit everyone, I think, and contribute to the development of new, more just, hopefully more inclusive cultural orientations. That would be it. Thank you very much.